The first time a WCK warrior noticed a human sitting at the back of the transport, he assumed it was out of fear. That assumption turned out to be his final mistake. The transport, typical for diplomatic summits, had rows of durable seats fixed to the floor, built to support even the largest species. The colossal reptilian warlords, sat near the front, their massive bodies shifting impatiently. Behind them were the Gari, their thick, shelled bodies scraping against the interior with every movement. A few Zola, tall with multiple joints, claimed the middle seats, chattering in their sharp clicking language. The humans, as usual, were at the very back, slouched as if the universe's worries didn't concern them. Geralt, a veteran of 100 wars, was irritated, no, insulted. Humanity had only been part of the Galactic Concord for a few decades, yet they acted as though they knew something the older species didn't. Always in the back, always watching, always so annoyingly indifferent, it struck him as a sign of weakness. He slightly turned his head, his crimson eyes narrowing. "Is it cowardice that keeps you back there, human?" Sergeant Nolan, the human in question, exhaled through his nose. "Just have it," he said, offering no further explanation. Geralt curled his lip. "I've seen prey act like you, staying to the edges, avoiding the strong." He flexed his claws against the seat's metal armrest. "But you're supposed to be warriors, aren't you?" Nolan smirked. "You don't seem to know much about us." The Zola, near the center, hissed with amusement, while the Gari, who had little patience for words, simply observed. Geralt's jaw clenched, but before he could respond, the transport jolted to a halt. The doors hissed open, revealing the dark expanse of the docking bay. The summit was supposed to take place on neutral ground, an orbital station at the center of known space intended for peacekeeping. But something was wrong. The lights flickered, and a thick silence stretched across the bay, followed by the sound of metal twisting under immense strain. Geralt rose, as did the others. Their instincts, honed by years of war, told them it was an ambush. The first explosion hit before anyone could react. The shockwave sent bodies flying, and seats were torn from their bolts. Geralt was thrown forward, slamming into the wall, barely registering the pain before a second explosion hit. The Varric scrambled to recover, but the assault was unrelenting. A third explosion tore open the side of the vehicle, exposing them to the docking bay, where dozens of attackers flooded in. They weren't just pirates. They fought with coordination, their weapons cutting through even Drari armor. Plasma fire filled the air, and though the Ver were built for war, they were caught off guard. Geralt roared, slashing at the nearest assailant. His claws tore through the attacker's suit, but there were too many. He turned, expecting to see the humans cowering at the back, but what he saw made his breath stop. Nolan wasn't there anymore, nor were his men. Then the lights failed completely. In the darkness, movement stirred, quick and fluid. The sound of a blade slicing through the air. A strangled cry. Another. Then silence. A dim emergency light bathed the bay in red. The attackers were gone. No, they were sprawled across the floor, motionless. Their bodies lay still, their weapons untouched. Geralt's heart pounded. His warriors stood stunned, scanning the battlefield. Then he saw them, at the edge of the bay, near the back, just beyond the carnage. The humans. Nolan and his men stood there, untouched, as if the chaos hadn't reached them. Their weapons were still holstered, their uniforms flawless. They looked at the remaining warriors with an expression Geralt had never seen before. Something far worse than fear. Recognition. Geralt forced himself to move, to speak, to demand an answer, but the humans were already walking. They stepped over the bodies without even glancing at them. Not a single one had drawn a weapon, yet the attackers lay motionless. Their assault had been wiped out before it had even started. The remaining warriors of the Varric, Drari, and Zola slowly gathered themselves. Some hesitated, weapons at the ready, but none dared approach the humans. They had all seen what had just happened. No one could explain it. The air still smelled of scorched metal and ozone from the plasma fire, yet the humans were untouched. Geralt's throat rumbled with unease. "What did you do?" Nolan finally stopped and turned to look at the Ver. His expression sent a chill down Geralt's spine. "We sat in the back." It wasn't an answer, yet it was. The humans had waited until the chaos peaked, and by then it was already over. No warning, No grand show of force, just a cold, efficient eradication of every single threat. The silence stretched on, but there was no time to reflect. From the corridor beyond the wreckage, alarms blared, and heavy boots pounded the metal floor. More hostiles were inbound. The Varric, Drari, and Zith warriors gathered their weapons, bracing for another attack. This time, however, they weren't so confident. They had spent their lives believing they were the strongest species in the galaxy, yet mere minutes ago, the humans had revealed something none of them could deny, an understanding of combat none of them could grasp. The entrance to the docking bay burst open as a new wave of assailants stormed in. These weren't simple pirates or mercenaries. Their weapons were heavier, their movements sharper, their tactics more refined. A squad of 5 human soldiers stepped forward. Nolan gave no orders. His men moved seamlessly, without hesitation. They advanced without cover, without fear, as if they already knew the outcome before the fight began. The first shots rang out, and the humans reacted faster than any species Geralt had ever seen. One of them sidestepped an incoming blast with the smallest shift of his stance, returning fire in a single, unhurried motion. Another moved like a phantom through the chaos, closing the distance before his target even realized what was happening. The Ver fought like beasts, claws and plasma blades carving through enemies. The Drari relied on brute force, their thick armor absorbing blows that would have killed lesser beings. The Zith were fast, striking at vulnerable points with surgical precision. But none of them were like the humans. The battle was over in minutes. As the last enemy fell, Geralt turned his gaze to Nolan. The human was already walking toward the far end of the docking bay, barely acknowledging the carnage. "You knew," Geralt growled, striding after him. "You knew they were coming." Nolan shrugged. "Of course we knew." Geralt bared his fangs. "Then why did you wait?" Nolan finally stopped, giving Geralt a long look. "Because we don't fight fair. We don't fight for honor or dominance, or any of that nonsense your kind cares about." His voice was calm, but there was something behind it, something Geralt couldn't define. "We fight to win." There was nothing more to say. The group moved on, leaving the docking bay behind. More enemies awaited, but the outcome had already been decided. The humans walked at the back of the formation, just as they had in the transport. And for the first time, Geralt understood why. As they made their way through the orbital station's corridors, dimly lit and filled with echoes of distant combat, the remaining warriors of the Varric, Drari, and Zola advanced cautiously, their weapons ready but their confidence shaken. The humans followed, silent and watchful, always at the rear. Geralt, a seasoned fighter, found himself focusing more on the men behind him than the ones ahead. The humans had revealed something unsettling, something he had never considered possible, and it gnawed at him more than any enemy ever had. They dispatched smaller resistance groups with brutal efficiency. The humans never led the charge, they never rushed. They allowed the others to engage first, stepping in only when the fight became too difficult. Each time they did, the battle ended instantly. As they neared the station's control center, the enemy prepared their final stand. Heavy gun emplacements lined the walls, automatic turrets locked onto their position, and a squad of elite enforcers took defensive positions. This would be their hardest fight yet. Geralt flexed his claws, preparing to charge. The Drari braced their shields, and the Zola took flanking positions. The humans did nothing. Nolan exhaled and looked at his men. Time to clean up. They moved faster than anything Geralt had ever witnessed. Not with the reckless abandon of berserkers or the desperation of cornered prey, but with precision. Every movement was deliberate, calculated, an unspoken language of war only they seemed to understand. The enemy barely had time to react. The first turret exploded before it could even fire. The second jammed after a single burst. One of Nolan's men disappeared into the shadows, and a moment later, half the defenders were down, their throats silently slit. The Varric warriors charged forward, only to realize the humans had already cut through most of the enemy force. By the time Geralt reached the last remaining defenders, there was no one left to fight. The battle had ended before it had even begun. The control center doors hissed open. Inside, a high-ranking enemy officer stood, weapon drawn, face twisted in desperation. "Stop!" the officer shouted. "You don't understand." Nolan raised a single hand. The officer hesitated. "Too late." "We know," Nolan said, and a single shot rang out. The officer collapsed, his weapon clattering to the floor. Silence filled the room. The battle was over. The mission was complete. Geralt turned to Nolan, his throat tight with words he never thought he'd say. You fight differently. Nolan met his gaze. We fight to win. The Ver warrior clenched his jaw. He had spent his life believing his people were the pinnacle of strength, the masters of combat. Yet here they were, alive, not because of their own might, but because the humans had chosen to let them survive. As they returned to the transport, Geralt fell into step beside Nolan. Tell me the truth, he said. Why do you always sit in the back? Nolan smirked. Because that's where the survivors are. For the first time in his life, Geralt had no response. The war was over, but the consequences of what had been witnessed would ripple across the galaxy for generations to come. The battle at the orbital station had not only secured a diplomatic victory, but had shattered humanity's image in the eyes of the galaxy's most powerful species. The Ver, Drari, and Zola had always thought of themselves as the apex warriors, measuring strength by brute force and victory by the number of bodies left behind. The humans had rewritten those definitions in a single night. As the survivors returned to their fleets, the uneasy silence among the warriors spoke louder than any words ever could. The Ver, once loud and eager to boast, now spoke in hushed tones. The Drari, who had prided themselves on their impenetrable defenses, had seen enemies crumble before the humans even needed to fire a shot. The Zola, masters of strategy and precision, had witnessed an even greater calculation unfold before them, one they couldn't yet comprehend. Geralt sat alone in his quarters, replaying the battle in his mind. Every tactic, every movement, every decision the humans had made. They had been patient, calculating, always waiting for the right moment. It wasn't their weapons' power or the efficiency of their strikes that unsettled him. It was the way they had known how the fight would play out before it had even begun. A message pinged on his console. It was a summons from the Bree High Council. Of course they wanted answers. He didn't have them. The humans had returned to their fleet without celebration, without boasting, without any claim of dominance. They had simply completed their mission and left. That, more than anything, disturbed him. Warriors fought for glory. Conquerors fought for power. But the humans fought for something else entirely. The transport to the High Council chamber was silent. Geralt walked past rows of Elder Ver, their expressions unreadable. They had all seen the reports. They had all heard the whispers. Humanity had changed the battlefield forever. The High Chancellor, an ancient warrior scarred by centuries of conflict, watched him approach. We've read your report, the Chancellor said. We've spoken with the Drari and its leadership. Tell us, Geralt, do you believe humanity is a threat? The question hung in the air. Geralt's claws flexed at his sides. Part of him wanted to say yes. Part of him wanted to warn them that humanity was unlike anything they had ever faced. But he had seen something else that night, something far more dangerous than their efficiency in battle. They are not a threat, Geralt said finally. They are a warning. The council chamber fell into heavy silence. The Chancellor's eyes narrowed. Explain. Geralt took a deep breath. The humans fight as if they've already seen the end of the war. They don't seek conquest, nor do they revel in combat. They fight with purpose, with finality. It's not about power or pride for them. It's survival. The Chancellor leaned forward. And what does that mean for us? Geralt met his gaze. It means that if we ever force them into war, they'll end it before we even realize it's begun. The chamber remained silent long after he spoke. Across the galaxy, similar discussions took place. The Drari war councils debated their fortifications, wondering if their defenses would matter against a species that needed no fortresses to win. The Zola strategists tried to predict human battle patterns, but found their calculations led to a single inevitable conclusion: unpredictability. Humanity had done something no species had ever done before. They had not conquered. They had not threatened. They had simply shown the others the truth. The strongest species in the galaxy now knew what it truly meant to fight a human. And none of them would ever be the same again.